All right, I think we'll get started. For those that don't know me, I'm Dan Katz. I'm the Assistant Director for Scientific Software and Applications here. I have the pleasure of introducing Melissa Cragin, who is Executive Director of the Midwest Big Data Hub, which is the thing that she'll be talking about. She's also Assistant Director for Data Ecosystems here at NCSI. And before she came here, she worked on data policy and community engagement for the Office of the Assistant Director in the Biological Sciences Directorate at NSF. First as a AAAS fellow and then as a staff associate. And before she went there, she had been here and as a faculty at the iSchool, which was at that point GISLIS, but has now changed. And her research was on the development and use of infrastructure for shared scientific data, and she led the data curation education program. Her PhD is from here as well, and so I'd like to welcome Melissa.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Good morning, and thanks, Dan. So it's really nice to be able to be here. I've been back in Champaign now for almost a year, and the opportunity to have worked on this project now for so long is a good one. It's been a great 11 months so far, and so I'm really happy to be able to tell you about where we are. The hub was just getting started when I arrived, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about the program. But I thought I'd first we'll start with a little introduction first of my work. I think just so you have a sense for where I came from in terms of my academic interests and research interests, and why the hub appeals to me, and how I'm hoping I'll be able to help develop the hub. So. Just briefly, we'll do my background, but then I'm going to talk a little bit about the federal Big Data Initiative and where the hub program came from. I think that providing that context will be important for understanding what the anticipated role is for the big data hubs in the data ecosystem in the U.S. And then we'll talk specifically about the Midwest hub and what we're doing and where there might be opportunities to engage. Okay, so I had a different career before I went back to school. I was working in the special education field and assistive technology. I worked with people with autism and developmental disabilities and other kinds of disabilities for about 17 years. And I got very interested, interestingly, the assistive technology organization where I worked was housed at the Department of State Library Services. And so I was engaged with people some of whom developed one of the first state-based free nets to have access to the internet, and people doing public television. So information development and knowledge dissemination was really interesting. And so I decided it was time for me to figure out where I fit in that information space. So I went to Rutgers to do a master's degree in library and information science, and got very interested in how, as social beings, we interact with information, share it, how we produce it, where it goes, how we decide how it's valued, but also doing that in the context of work environments. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about those things, and then when I finished my work at the iSchool here, when I finished my dissertation and joined the faculty, I was part of the DataNet program. I was actually senior scientist on the Data Conservancy, which was one of the first DataNet projects awards, and got very interested in the science policy aspects happening around data and cyber infrastructure. So I had the opportunity to become a AAAS Science Policy Fellow and go to DC. That was just a great honor, and we learned a lot. The AAAS Science Policy Fellows learned a tremendous amount, being seated across the executive and legislative aspects of the federal government, and learning about what it means to do science and engage with policy, both policy for science and science for policy. And then I had the opportunity to actually do public service, and that also is a real honor. So anybody that's interested in thinking about going and working for any amount of time for the federal government, particularly in science capacity, it's just an amazing adventure. Okay, so that's me, and I'm happy to talk about any of those things, especially if there are ways I can support any of the activities going on here or your projects. I'm happy to do that. Okay, so on we go. So in 2012, the White House and the Office of Science Technology Policy rolled out the Big Data Initiative for the federal government. And a handful of agencies in the executive branch mobilized about $200 million of money to begin to develop or re-energize programs that focused in the big data space. And those were across agencies, and those programs were of all different variety. But at NSF, which is where our funding comes from, or at least our startup funding comes from, NSF did a couple of things. They developed a big data research program, and then they also decided that figuring out a way to intersect, develop the data ecosystem in ways that connected social groups, organizations, cyber infrastructure resources, and scientists would be a good thing. So in 2014, they decided to hold some charrettes, one in each region, and out of those listening sessions for NSF came a call for proposals. They only took one proposal from each region, and then in 2015, they made the awards for the 4 hubs. So each of the hubs has received about $1.5 million as startup funds, and they are literally startup funds. They are just enough to get us going in terms of developing some operations, being able to do some network development and outreach, and thinking about new ways to do business in this connective and networking space in each of our regions, and then collectively across the country. So we'll get to all of that in a moment. And then the last piece, which we'll also talk about, is that in 2016, there was an additional solicitation for what they called spoke and planning grants, directly related to the thematic areas or those focal areas of interest to each of the regions. And so about $11 million were awarded across the 4 hubs for partnerships and network development or regional community development activities in those areas of interest for each of us. And we'll talk about those specifically in a few minutes. So from the NSF portfolio itself, it's really interesting how they sort of describe it now and think about how they manage the portfolio around big data and where they're putting their investments. So first of all, we know that, and the new solicitation just came out recently for critical techniques and technologies for big data. Interestingly, the new solicitation includes partnership directly with the big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. And it's an interesting new proposition. They've brought the tech industry, the tech partners, directly into the solicitation process. There's also, many of you are familiar already with the DIBS program, and so they now partner as part of this big data portfolio program at NSF. There's the National Research Traineeships that are happening across the country, and they've identified data as one of those specific areas for proposals to go in, for training, both workforce development, but then also PhD level traineeships. And then we've got the new group here is how do we build partnerships? So public, private, academic, industry, government, NGO partnerships, really to leverage that network to take advantage of data and data science. So this is the portfolio, and we fit there. And so here are the regions. And I actually got to hear the program officer, Fen Zhao, give a talk at NASA the other day. And because the question comes up often, well, why these regions? And so NSF decided a couple of reasons. They used the census block. They wanted to try and have regions where the population was relatively similar for the region. And they also wanted to be able to see whether nearness, geographic nearness, would facilitate additional face-to-face kinds of meetings. And so, okay, so anyway, we have the regions here, and the Northeast is based at Columbia. The South has 2 PIs, and 2 exec directors, co-exec directors, one in Chapel Hill at Rensselaer and one down at Georgia Tech. I'll get to ours in a moment. We're structured a little bit differently. In the West, they did a collaborative proposal, so everybody's structured a little differently with the hubs. And the PIs in the West are at UW, Berkeley, and then SDSC, San Diego. And there's just one exec director based at Berkeley there. In the Midwest, single exec director, me, I'm here. Ed Seidel in the front row, whom you know, is the PI. And then we have 4 co-PIs. So it's not a collab, it's a regular award. But our PIs, our co-PIs are based at Indiana University, University of Michigan, Iowa State University, and University of North Dakota. Okay, so that's the region, and I'll talk about some differences and opportunities to collaborate across with the other regions as we move forward. So what are we doing? So essentially, the 4 hubs are consortial in relationship. We have an MOU, we have a memorandum of understanding about how we'll work together, share best practices, share things we learn, and processes or experiments that don't work in the ways that we're developing. We also have agreed to have a shared cyber infrastructure working group, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But really the goal is for us to strengthen partnerships, to learn from each other, to provide access to resources across the 4 hubs that may not exist from one region to another. And ultimately, it's not simply about academic research, but it is about addressing scientific and societal grand challenges. And so in the Midwest in particular, I think about that as connecting academic research institutions and 4-year teaching schools for workforce development, and these things directly related to economic development in the Midwest. So here we are. So we have a mission. It's a mouthful, but essentially it builds off the previous slide. And that is, we are really interested in helping build capacity so we have effective networks of expertise and resources that are able to apply data science and big data techniques to be able to solve shared problems. And so when we talk about how we mobilize in the hub and where those verticals came from, we can talk about sort of where we're organizing our interests now and our focus and resources. But really, we do this in 3 ways. We cultivate communities by providing some seed funding for activities. We convene meetings that are of interest, sort of at that frontier of data science, computation, scientific discovery, and areas of interest for industry in terms of economic development. So where do those come together? And that's where we spend some time and resources. And what are the goals? Well, part of it is to reduce friction in data to decision systems. What does that mean? That means making it easier to find and use data. So helping move toward, for example, data use agreements and user agreements that may be models for others to use. Let me give you a specific example here. We know from work being done at one of the groups out in the Northeast Big Data Hub that on average it takes 12 to 18 months to negotiate a data use agreement or a data sharing agreement. And the cost of that, if you can imagine, to have those one-off agreements happen, the cost of that for a company and their legal staff and for academic faculty and the university legal staff, the costs and the time to do that are prohibitive, really, for conducting science at the pace we need to do it, and really for the pace that industry wants to work. And so this is a space that we're working in directly to help reduce the time to these data sharing agreements between academia and industry. So we work in these kinds of spaces on a regular basis, and these are being done in different ways across the hubs. We're also working on developing some consortia relationships with industry to share data in some new ways that they're not doing right now. And we think this is going to be fruitful going forward. We're testing some of this in the dig-ag space, in the digital agriculture space right now, and moving forward. And the other thing is building capacity in data science in the Midwest. And we do that by mobilizing resources, existing resources, but also helping engage both the universities and industry in workforce development pipelines. So out of those charrettes, those organizational meetings that happened in the Midwest that led to the proposals, or for all 4 of the regions that led to the proposals for the hubs, the idea was to identify spoke or thematic areas that were of interest and to the regions, and driving both sort of organized and focal areas of science and the industry in the region, and where governments had an interest too in terms of what they would like to focus on. And in the Midwest, I think some of these will not be a surprise. In the Midwest, urban metro sciences, smart cities is of real interest. And some of you may know of Charlie Catlett and his work with the array of things coming out of UC and Argonne. And if I can talk about that later offline, but essentially he's building very low-cost sensor arrays to place around the city of Chicago to be collecting real-time data to help people make decisions about going to work and what routes they take and air quality and those sorts of things. So very exciting work happening there, and thinking about how to replicate that in other cities is part of how the hub engages. Business analytics, materials and manufacturing, digital agriculture, health and biomed, and we have a very large group of people, primarily early career folks, engaged in community-led, data-driven public health. And so we're working on building networks at the local level and with science groups at universities around the Midwest to help build networks there to open up data for public health concerns. Neurosciences, community resilience, and that project's led right here with Scott Poole, and transportation. And the only one that's not on here is a group being led out of Indiana in network sciences. And they sort of sit across because they're providing network science expertise across these applied areas. So how are we structured? Well, we've got an exec team made up of Ed and the other co-PIs, and I meet with them regularly, and they sit on the steering committee as well and provide leadership to a steering committee. The steering committee is also made up of the leads from all these thematic community groups, as well as 2 cross-cutting groups, data science and education. And we've got a data tools and services working group that is at the moment leaderless. We would love to have someone engage in that space, and I just want to give a shout out to Kenton, who actually led that from the beginning, and it still represents the hub on the 4-hub cyber infrastructure working group, and so we're really appreciative of his time on that. We had an election this year, so to draw new interest from across the Midwest, we've got at-large reps, and then we've got 2 at-large folks that were appointed by the exec committee. We do have bylaws in place. We actually had we have formal bylaws. We had a vote on that. So we are really functioning in the way that NSF wanted us to develop. The intention is that the hubs will become self-sustaining organizations within a handful of years. And so we moved forward with beginning to develop such an organization. So actual bylaws, eventually the idea is that a steering committee will become a board of directors. We'll have external support and management. And whether we're a fully standalone, sort of 501(c)(3) nonprofit, or whether we're affiliated with the university in a different way, we're not sure yet. That's part of the growth in terms of how we're thinking about the startup process. But we are well on our way to becoming standalone and hopefully self-sustaining. Okay, so I talked a little bit ago about the spoke solicitation that came out from NSF, and so we have 7 awards here in the Midwest, and so we're on par actually with the Northeast, which also has a similar number of awards and funding. So we have 3 full spoke awards at about $1 million apiece. Digital agriculture, which is being led out of your University of North Dakota, and they're focused on precision agriculture and unmanned aerial systems and the data support services and analytics that come from having unmanned aerial systems and satellite-type data and other sensor data from fields integrated and used for decision-making at the farm level. The Collaborative Advanced Computational Neuroscience Network is a collab, so it's spread out across 5 universities. Each of the universities in that collab is working on a little bit different perspective on making neuroscience data much more readily available and open across neuroscience researchers, primarily in imaging. But there's also other kinds of data being integrated into that system as well. And then we just heard last week that Ian Foster's collaborative proposal for material science got awarded, and so we've got 3 full proposals. These awards are to really build the network, maybe to build up some data sorts of pilot projects and to test some of those, but these aren't cyber infrastructure awards. These awards are really to build community, to help leverage the opening up and making data accessible to be able to drive new science. So the expectation is that there'll be a lot of new proposals that come out of these, the communities and the pilot projects being developed under these awards. We have 3 planning grants, Bridge Health, which is being led out of University of Nebraska, Omaha and Lincoln. And that's really an interesting project with sensors and working with governments on how do we integrate government data to manage repair cycles for bridges and real-time decision-making, as well as other kinds of research. So that's happening as well, and they're a very active community being led out of there. Another sensor project here, so being led out of Purdue, planning grant as well, and then this resilience in communities project being led out of Illinois. We've got an eager also at Columbus out of OSU, so interesting research happening there as well with getting citizen scientists to be collecting air quality data as they're moving around the city to help drive decisions there in the community. So those are the grants we have connected to the hub in terms of that solicitation. We also have other funding that's come in. I won't spend much time here in terms of what we're doing, but we're very engaged in a number of ways with facilitating new types of activities that drive additional research or data science training and development. Here are some of the ways that we're actually spending some of these resources we have in. In the industry engagement space, we funded a number of activities or workshops where industry partners are fully on board in these activities and helping to drive decisions about how the academic community is engaging directly with the companies, primarily around research and then data partnerships, but some with workforce development as well. We've got a number of activities that we've funded. Now the Midwest Big Data Summer School is running up at Iowa State University. We'll be running that for the next couple summers, and we'll be expanding that as we go on. And here you can see a number of other, I listed these, not only these sort of activities that we're funding, we're trying to support activities all over the Midwest. And finally, we also can, when we are able with funds, support directly hackathons, travel support, and those sorts of things, both for early career faculty and for students. While we don't have the resources to support hackathons directly, we also are partnering now with the National Data Service, and we can provide some kinds of support for hackathons out across the region with some tools that they have available now there. So partnerships. And this may be of interest because some of these are being supported right here at NCSA. So I'll only talk about 2 of these. One is the Open Commons Consortium. which is led out of the University of Chicago and is part of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration Public-Private Cloud Partnership to open up environmental data to fully open access. The data has been available before. Some of this data has been available before, but it was not readily usable by most researchers in the community, let alone the public. So we are, with the Center for Advanced Cyber GIS and the Roger Resource, making some of these data stores available. We'll actually be eventually holding and making accessible about 200 terabytes of data from these NOAA environmental data sets. On top of that, we are now talking with them about making brand new satellite data available that is not readily available anyplace else. And so we have an opportunity now to be serving out data that's going to be brand new data. So this is sort of exciting because we'll be out on the edge of being able to get new satellite data to researchers. Okay, so I think the other one that I want to just mention is coming up. Well, I guess I should just do really briefly too. We're engaged partnership with the South Big Data Hub to mobilize the material science communities across both our regions because we've got really big activity happening at Georgia Tech and very big activity happening coming out of Northwestern and some other partners. And so we are really together driving this. And so we're very open to having people be engaged in the materials informatics community. In this way, we'll be sending people to some workshops happening over the next few months as well. And then the next one simply is this one here because we're actually hosting this meeting in partnership with the International Food Security at Illinois group, and they're based at ACES. So machine learning farm to table. Most of that meeting will happen, part of that meeting, the public parts of that meeting will be happening next door at CSL, and we welcome people to come to that. Anybody is welcome to come to those open sessions there. So those are our partnerships, and we're engaging also cross-hubs. So I'm going to mention again just two of these. I've mentioned one already. So I think the next one I want to talk about is what we're doing with Microsoft Research. Microsoft Research came to the hubs and offered us about $3 million worth of Azure services. So we've got about $3 million worth of Azure credits split up across the 4 hubs. We are able to make those resources available to members of the Midwest region. And I should add, to be a member, anybody to be a member of the Midwest Hub just has to sign up for our mail list, and that makes you a member. And so the 4 hubs, the exec directors, worked with our regions, our PIs and others, and the 5 of us hub directors got together and developed a set of principles to work with Microsoft Research to be able to provide some different ways of engaging around the Azure proposal and access process. And I won't spend any time on the details of those, but we reduced the requirements for getting access. We've been able to reduce across the board some of the requirements for getting access to those Azure cycles. And probably one of the most important ones was to get rid of the back end or provide a mechanism for covering the back end charges for moving data back out of Azure at the end of a project, which normally is quite costly, and we've developed a way to get that covered as part of the proposal process. I think the other one I want to talk about here, well, there are 2. Let me start with this one. This is going to be mobilizing pretty quickly, the National Data Science Challenge on reducing traffic fatalities. So each of the 4 hubs is coming up with charge statements or questions of interest for the region. Our transportation community area is driving some of that. If people are interested in standing up a team or want to be engaged in this national challenge to bring together new kinds of data, to make it interoperable and do analytics across it to help understand better what's driving the high and increasing rate of traffic fatalities, particularly pedestrian fatalities, which is very high right now in urban centers. So this is a challenge that's being launched in just a couple of couple of months. And so there'll be lots of activities happening around this, and we'd be happy to have people engage in that. But the other one is the National Technical Information Service. So NTIS, which is part of the Department of Commerce, is now engaged in providing direct service around providing access to federal agencies, expertise and resources, both in terms of data science, but then also cyber infrastructure resources and support for using data to solve problems in the federal government. The Midwest Hub is actually part of two of these. So NCSA, it actually has our own proposal in. We've been selected as a joint venture partner for NTIS. So NCSA is doing one of these as well, and the hub is on that one. And we're also part of a 4-hub partnership agreement. And so the idea is to be able to pull together expertise, as I said, for rapid deployment to address specific data problems and contracts coming out of the federal government. So it's a way to provide, improve operations in the federal government, but also potentially a funding stream for the hubs. So here's just a few opportunities to engage, and I'm about to wrap up here, and then I'm happy to answer questions. So what are we doing? Well, this year, going forward, we have two primary objectives for the coming year. One is to help us begin to understand what the business plan is going to be for the hub. So aligning the value propositions across academia, industry, and the government to understand how we can serve the intersections of those constituencies as a regional hub. So what do we do? How do we build expertise in the hub to help support those things? And how do we understand the intersection of where their needs are? And we're doing that in a couple of ways. We're going to be developing a regionally based business roundtable specifically related to data in the Midwest. And so we'll be partnering with people here at Illinois, but also at a couple other universities and with some companies from other parts of the region. And the other thing that we'll be focused on this year is also really building out our reach across the region. And we'll be doing that in a couple of new ways, including developing a new program to bring the four-year colleges much more closely into the hub. And so I'm sure that some of you will have partners in the region at four-year schools who might be interested in engaging in the hub this way. And there'll be funds provided to help mobilize leaders from those four-year schools and then help mobilize resources, data science and big data resources for those four-year schools. So that's what we're doing. We're really interested in having anybody engage in any ways they would like. You're not limited to engaging in the Midwest Hub. The other regions have different thematic areas of interest, and I will point you momentarily to those sites. And there are also other kinds of national data challenges that will be happening where people might be interested to engage. So that's us. And I spend a lot of time on the road, as some of you may know, but I'm out all the time giving talks not only about the hub, but including some of the work happening here and where that fits with the hub. Here are my colleagues, the other exec directors. I just thought I'd point them here. The websites are here on the slides, and so the activities being driven out of those hubs are all available on their websites. Thanks very much.
Okay, are there any questions? Microphones that can, okay, run around and find you.
Hi, I was wondering, we have a number of postdocs, I know, and students here at NCSA who are looking at different technology problems and algorithms and so on. Is there any activity within the hub to collect up challenging problems? So if, for example, problems that can't be solved because I know people can't figure out how to take advantage of networks or how to, mine certain information. Are there any cross-cutting activities like that to sort of present challenge problems that might be interesting for technologists to solve?
So the way those are collected now are driven primarily through the stakeholder activities. So as opposed to us collecting them formally, let me walk that back. So we have sent out surveys in a couple of ways. But of course, those surveys go only to the people signed up for the mailing list, right? Or signed up for some particular event. So we are working on collecting those sorts of things in a formal way. This coming year, we actually are engaging, we're doing some strategic planning. We'll be doing a much broader formal collection of those sorts of things in that way. But we also collect them through the activities happening that are being driven by the thematic communities. So when the digital agriculture community had their all hands meeting, for example, they're collecting those things. They report them back to us, and then that helps us connect directly with the federal agencies around where they might be able to put some funding in to help solve some of those things. So it's at that meta level that we're doing some of that. Yeah, thanks. But I'm happy to have anybody come talk to me specifically about, we have a space that doesn't seem to be finding any traction anywhere. That would be great. Let me give you another example of some of how that happens. I have people call regularly and say, gee, I sit in this space between this very large initiative at our university and where the community is going with these kinds of problems. There's no way to connect up between them. So I can take that and then mobilize around that, but yes, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, so we have an Amazon Web Services contract that's all been signed and sealed and dotted and stuff.
Yes.
And I know that there are folks out there who are itching to get their hands on Azure, but I don't know, does anyone know where the U of I specifically is in making us able to connect to what you guys are doing with the Big Data Hub in Azure?
Sure. Okay. So that's a good question. So I have a couple of things. So when you say we, you mean the University of Illinois? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So there are a couple things happening with that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you just to clarify one. So when you said you AWS or Azure?
We currently have AWS.
Yes.
We got that through the process.
Yes.
I've heard of various legal roadblocks being in, specifically, I mean, I work for technology services. I've heard of roadblocks being in our way with Azure. I didn't know how you're bridging those.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, and I apologize for wanting to clarify. So, couple things. It is possible that the hub will also have some arrangement with AWS going forward, but right now, and I'll get back to your specific question in a second, but right now, Google, AWS, and Microsoft are partnering directly with NSF in the most recent solicitation around access. So I just want to reiterate that piece. In terms of the hub, it wasn't with Microsoft Azure, the Azure unit that we've got this arrangement. It's through Microsoft Research. So they came to us directly, and so there's not a direct connection with the university. The way that the process works is that Microsoft Research unit has allocated a lot of their Azure resource allocation that they have internally to the hubs. The proposal process happens in the same way that it would normally happen. It goes directly to Microsoft. So the hubs don't get the gift directly. It goes to Microsoft Research, the proposal, and they identify it as being connected to one of the hubs. I'm often on the call with the proposer and Microsoft Research around that proposal. So we understand what is happening in terms of an allocation and the project that's being proposed. And we can help navigate or negotiate things. So all of that is happening quite separately from whatever's happening at the university level. I'm perfectly happy to have anybody ask, come and talk with me about potential projects for that allocation. I will say that we've got 2 in the pipeline right now. One of the things that Microsoft is really interested in was supporting directly those Spoke and Planning Grant awards that came through the Spoke solicitation. And we actually have one proposal that is related to one Spoke award, and we have one proposal in that's not. But is related to the data science working group. So we have a couple of proposals in now, and again, so that's how we sit. We're not sort of directly connected. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess one other question.
Please.
I was thinking about the fact that sometimes you hear people saying that if there was an opportunity to do something economically, then a company would come and would do it, which isn't 100% true, but has some sense of truth in some cases. And so I was curious in terms of thinking about the data hub and sustainability, what's going on in industry that is comparable in any way? Are there consortia? Are there nonprofits? Are there for-profit organizations that are trying to do anything similar? And how would you work with them, or how do you work with them, if so?
Yeah, so thanks, Dan. That's a good question. So in part, that's some of the work we're doing now, is to figure out what is in the space and how do we find the right fit. And I think for the Midwest hub anyway, because each of the hubs are actually approaching this a little bit differently, and we're engaged with our constituencies quite differently. In the Midwest, because of the thematic areas we're focused on, there are a lot of actually very hard problems that are not able to be solved directly by industry. And so for example, in materials and advanced manufacturing, in agriculture and food, energy, water. And those are the spaces we're working primarily in right now, the hardest, because that's where we can test out some things. So that said, there are some other groups that are existing that we're trying to figure out where do we fit with them and how do we provide something different or partner in some way. One of those is the Great Lakes Consortium. The Great Lakes Consortium is essentially Canadian, U.S., nonprofit organization that is looking at economic development and partnerships across the 12 states that sit around the Great Lakes. So we have 6 of those states that are already part of that consortium. They have an economic development goal. They are a member-driven organization, so they take fees. And actually, we got invited to go and speak at their next economic forum. And I'll be doing that with somebody from Dun & Bradstreet, their chief data science person, as well as the Supercomputing Center from the University of Toronto, which is providing direct services to industry in the data science and big data space. And so the opportunity is for us to even think about, is there a slice separate for us? Do we partner directly with them? And the other piece is specifically about sort of the economic development piece, is that what we also know from some meetings that have already happened and from talking to industry people is that they want to be part of academic industry government partnerships, and that in and of itself, being able to get the right people and resources to the table is actually a value proposition that they will pay for.
So I think we should
Right.
thank Melissa then again.
Thanks very much.